because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tonight on Farage, we discuss, will Rishi Sunak give all the WhatsApp messages over to the COVID inquiry? And if not, why not? We discuss the size of the nanny state. We're the #1 nanny state in Europe, but does it really help people's lifestyle choices? We'll go to Turnberry again to ask, why won't the British Open Golf Championship go back there, given it's the #1 rated course in Europe and Britain? And we'll attempt to have a civilised debate between Animal Rising and Richard Pittman on why it's outrageous to attempt to disrupt the Epsom Derby this Saturday. That and much more, all in a moment, but first, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you. Well, the top story tonight is the breaking news that ITV has ordered an external review following television presenter Philip Schofield's statement and departure from the daytime TV show This Morning. Chief Executive Dame Carolyn McCall wrote in a letter to the Culture Secretary and the Ofcom Chief Executive that Philip had made assurances which he now acknowledges were untrue, and we at ITV feel badly let down. We consider our approach reasonable and proportionate at the time, the letter continued. Well, it was also sent to the chair of the Culture, Media and Sport Committee in Parliament, and ITV bosses are due to appear in front of MPs on Tuesday to answer questions about the presenter's affair with a younger male colleague. Of course, we'll have full coverage of that for you as it happens next week. Well, also breaking news today, Boris Johnson's notebooks and WhatsApp messages have been handed to the Cabinet Office this afternoon. A spokesman for the Prime Minister saying he is the one that has asked for the full and unredacted details to be disclosed urgently to the COVID inquiry. That's after the Cabinet Office previously argued the material may be irrelevant. Downing Street has denied that it's a cover-up. The government has until tomorrow afternoon to hand over the evidence completely. But the main news today is that a former Russian president has warned that UK public officials who support Ukraine are legitimate military targets. Dmitry Medvedev, who's now deputy chairman of the Kremlin Security Council, says any UK military aid to Kyiv represents what he called an undeclared war against Russia. He called British officials goofy and Britain an eternal enemy. Medvedev also says that under the Hague and Geneva Conventions, the UK is considered to be a country at war. Well, the former British Army Colonel Hamish de Bretton Gordon told GB News earlier the comments aren't something to be concerned about.
Their threats of nuclear attack for the last 14 months have been, a completely vanishingly thin red line. So I think they're getting pretty desperate. They know that the counter-offensive is coming, and they know that ourselves, the Brits, are providing a lot of hardware, a lot of intelligence, and they think by threatening our MPs, they're going to change their mind. It might work in Russia, it won't work in this country.
Well, here in the UK, rail passengers across the country have been facing travel disruption today due to strike action by the ASLEF union. Members walked out today and are set to do so again on Saturday. Meanwhile, RMT union members will walk out on Friday. That'll cause major problems for football fans travelling to London for the FA Cup final at Wembley. The ASLEF General Secretary, Mick Whelan, accuses the government of not wanting a resolution. But the government says it has facilitated a fair and reasonable pay offer. Lastly, all tariffs have now been removed on goods exported from the UK to Australia and New Zealand. It's the first trade deal with the countries to come into effect in a post-Brexit negotiation. Shipments of British goods, such as signed Beano comics, are among the first to be sent under the new arrangements. It also means that red tape will be slashed for digital trade and work visas. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
It was seen to be the biggest health threat we'd faced since the so-called Spanish flu of 1919. Yes, as COVID-19 hove into view, as we saw the distressing scenes from Milano in northern Italy, the government decided, along with many other governments, that we had to lock down the country and effectively lock down the economy. I can't say that I blame them for doing it once, but I really do blame them for doing it over and over. I really do blame them for creating a culture of fear, using advertising campaigns, making sure any debate that questioned the actions was effectively suppressed, where newspapers would expose people as COVID-idiots if they dared challenge the established line. And we learned, and I mean, goodness me, we had Professor Carol Sikora on the show this week, one of the men that warned, actually, the health impacts of lockdown would be greater than if COVID was allowed to let rip. And we know long-term it has been an economic disaster for the country. It has been a physical health disaster for the country. It's been a psychological disaster for the country. Now, I don't entirely blame our government alone for this. After all, many other European governments, many other states in America took the same view. Sweden and Florida perhaps being the exceptions to the rule. But of course the time has come for a full and thorough inquiry into what happened, why it happened, and what we can learn in case there are future pandemics. And I'm talking about this assuming we will not sign up to the WHO's pandemic treaty, which if we do, of course, all bets are off because the British government wouldn't have a say. But isn't it interesting that the Swedes, their inquiry into COVID, done, dusted, over. Ours, we've appointed Baroness Hallett to run it. They've spent tens of millions of pounds already. They haven't as yet interviewed a single minister. But despite those criticisms, is it right that that inquiry should see Boris Johnson's diaries and emails from that period? Well, what did we learn from the leak of all the emails that came from Matt Hancock? We learned there was an attitude towards government, a contempt for ordinary people, a desire to make sure there were political outcomes, even if there were no health benefits to them. I thought some of the sheer cynicism that Hancock displayed was disgusting. So I've believed in this situation, even if there is private and personal material, even if there is material here that would be of a national security interest, I believe it's right that this is all handed over. Now, the pressure on Boris Johnson has been enormous. The deadline for all of this is 4 o'clock tomorrow. Boris Johnson has now given the Cabinet Office access to all of his WhatsApp messages and all of his diaries. So now the ball is very firmly in the court of Rishi Sunak, and he appears to be very reluctant to hand this data over. I ask you, do you think there is a cover-up going on here? Let me know what you think. Farage@gbnews.com. Well, Culvia Ranger, former advisor to Boris Johnson while he was Mayor of London and now political commentator. Culvia, you know, if there are, and I want to say this to begin with, if in Boris's diaries and WhatsApps there are very personal things of no relevance, if there are issues of potential national security, then of course Baroness Hallett must make sure they are not released to the public. And I want to make that clear from...
It's the first concern, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Especially when we see things leaking like the proverbial sieve from government. So
Well,
that's a concern, because as soon as it goes to other people...
Yes, I mean, look, you know, Matt Hancock trusted Isabel Oakeshott with all his emails and a whole lot appeared. I mean, you're right, there are elements of the civil service that appear to be at war with the Conservative Party, and I get that point. But back to the beginning of what I was saying at the start, you know, I believe that those subsequent successive lockdowns, the continuance of furlough policy, the closing of the economy, and I became more and more sceptical and cynical as this whole process...
We heard you, Nigel, we heard you.
No, but I really did.
Yeah, and a lot of people, quite rightly.
Yeah, and there were voices out there. We found ourselves effectively closed off on Twitter, on Facebook, mercifully not on GB News, which is a genuine free speech broadcaster, thank goodness. But it was very, very difficult to make any counter-arguments to the prevailing orthodoxy. So big question for you to begin with. Is it right that Baroness Hallett is able to access as much information as is possible?
I think on the basis, as we were saying and you were saying, that once this information does go to the inquiry, it stays with the inquiry unless relevant to be taken further into the public domain. That is the fundamental question. I think that's where the challenge is for the Cabinet Office and for the government, because it does set a precedent that anybody, the incumbent Prime Minister, a former Prime Minister, and let's be honest, there's a question here about this platform, WhatsApp, because it was seen as a private chat. It wasn't seen as a mechanism to do formal government conversation. Now, if conversations bled into WhatsApp, which all of our lives has proliferated, hasn't it, this thing that suddenly emerged. We used to do SMS. Does anybody do that old-fashioned text message anymore? We do WhatsApp, well, we do direct messaging. So do I, actually.
We've got Signal, and we've got all
of these things that suddenly appear and become entwined into the fabric of not just our lives, but our daily work. And I think there's a grey area there which is now coming to the fore about WhatsApp, personal, private, government information, what's relevant. Secondly, those conversations tend to be two-way. They aren't just somebody on broadcast. There's another conversation someone else is having. So by seeing a person's conversation, you are seeing the other side of the conversation.
Context, of course.
Exactly. But then coming to your point, Nigel, which is, you know, how was government policy being made? I think we need to drag ourselves back to that time where we saw a rather reluctant Boris Johnson taking the country into lockdown, especially that first time, and, you know, onwards, ever more so concerned about what was happening. But also, I just want to say this, there was a conversation that was had.
I'm sorry, just for a moment here. I'm sorry, I keep hearing Boris Johnson believes in low tax, but he puts taxes up. I keep hearing Boris Johnson's a libertarian, and yet, even against his better judgment, He kept approving lockdowns and the harshest restrictions ever imposed on the British people. You know, not even in wartime did we take away people's liberties. You worked with him when he was Mayor of London. I mean, these clearly are his character weaknesses.
His main challenge, and even when I worked with him, and everyone who's ever worked with him will tell you this, is that he will take everybody's opinion on board. He listens to everyone in the room, rightly or wrongly. And that can become quite challenging. And he was getting a lot of information. We all saw the chief scientific officer and the chief medical officer standing either side of the Prime Minister every time they were having those press conferences, agreeing and protecting the NHS line. Now, this is the pressure the Prime Minister was under from these experts, from the government, to say this is what you've got to do. Now, if he was going to stand aside and make a separate political decision, I think he would have had an even further difficulty with government, with the experts, with the NHS, about how we made our way through. And as you said, Nigel, pretty much every other country in the world was following this technique.
Doesn't mean they were right.
Doesn't mean that they were right, but they did.
You know, given that he's been reported again by the Cabinet Office for potential breaches of lockdown, do you feel there's an element of witch hunt against your old friend?
Well, you say reported. I think the Cabinet Office has yet to say whether it made a decision of what he's done. It's just information which he hasn't been allowed to clarify. They provided it without asking him. Context wasn't provided. He's again provided the information. He said it's been cleared by his lawyers that this was all legal, what was happening. So I think, you know, there still seems to be a steady drip feed of information that seems to damage Boris Johnson. And I think we've got to understand why that's happening. Why is it that there is so much information that flows through the Cabinet Office, sometimes without ministerial oversight even? It needs to tighten up. Government needs to do things in a way that people can understand the process. We don't want to do it by the media.
Are the civil service punishing Boris Johnson for Brexit?
That I couldn't possibly say. I think, you know, the two things seem to be separate there, because you've got Brexit is something that has happened. Boris Johnson has been Prime Minister and ran the country and has done some wonderful things for the country, but also in times of need. COVID was a time of need. The war in Ukraine was a time of need, and he led through those areas. I don't think people would hold some of those things against him. I think the civil service can't persecute or shouldn't persecute a former Prime Minister.
Wow.
It may feel that way. I know people use the word witch hunt. I think we have to ask ourselves, why do these pieces of information keep getting drip-fed out? There's due process, there's a COVID inquiry.
No, there is a problem.
Let's go through it.
No, there is a problem.
I think we all have a problem.
And I hope Baroness
that
Hallett keeps this stuff very tight to her chest.
I hope so too.
The ball is now firmly in the Prime Minister's court. And some are saying it's slippery Rishi. He won't answer whether by 4 p.m. tomorrow he's going to hand all these documents over. Do you think he will?
I think there is a pressure on the government to hand this information over now that Boris Johnson has handed it to them. So, you know, if we're going to have transparency, if we're going to kick that ball away that says there's a so-called cover-up, then we're going to have to go forward with information. I think that opens it up to everybody else's messages as well, and that's a challenge for government. The issue here is the government and the inquiry must put context around how this information comes forward so that the public understand how this is done.
I absolutely get that, Colville. Thank you for joining me. And a piece of advice for me, for you, for all of you. If you're on WhatsApp, use disappearing messages, because then they disappear and nobody can ever catch up with you again. And that's certainly what I think everyone ought to do. But in this case, let's get it out there. Let's try and establish the truth. Now, the Institute of Economic Affairs have just done a big survey, and guess what? The UK is the #1 nanny state in the European time zone. We are interfering in terms of people's personal choices and habits more than any other country with bans and taxes. Is it making the country any healthier? No. So is there a better way? Well, Wilfred Emmanuel Jones in a moment will join me to perhaps give us a better way forward.
Coming up on Dan Wootton Tonight, after Eamon Holmes exposed the disturbing truth about his former colleague Philip Schofield and This Morning, now Philip's female arch-nemesis speaks out against the toxic culture at ITV after she was driven to feeling suicidal by this shocking on-air confrontation.
I'm honest now, you don't seem right to me sitting here now. I mean, your speech is a bit slurred. I mean, how are you feeling now? It is a bit.
Former ITV daytime star Kerry Katona hits out at the woke broadcaster in another bombshell exclusive, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the people's channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the people's channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the people's channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the people's channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, we all know. Yes, we really do all know. Excess alcohol isn't good for you. Smoking isn't good for you. Huge consumption of sugary drinks and bad food isn't good for you. I think we all actually know that. And yet the reaction from our government has been to clamp down with alcohol taxes, astonishing tobacco taxes and bans on smoking. In fact, everywhere you look, the government is telling us what we can't do, attempting to ban us and taxing us to the hilt. The only exception being vapes, where we appear to have taken very little action. And really interesting that the Institute of Economic Affairs, they have said to us that we're the #1 nanny state in Europe, and yet is our health getting any better? No, actually, as a country, it's declining. Is there a better way of doing this? Well, I'm joined by Wilfred Emmanuel Jones, MBE, farmer, food entrepreneur, and of course you have your Black Farmer range of products.
And you've had a chance of trying some of my
products.
Brilliant.
You know, I mean, all of it. I like the vodka particularly, but oh gosh, hey, I'll be in trouble here as well.
But listen, everything you've just said about people know what's right for them.
Yes.
We should leave it down to people to make decisions about what drink and what food that they consume. But what has been happening over the last 10, 15 years is that governments have been going to the supermarkets, been going to the manufacturers and saying to them, OK, someone has come out with some report that's saying the reason for obesity is your fault, Mr. Supermarket, your fault, manufacturer, and therefore we want you to put less salt in, less sugar in, less fat in. And the bottom line is this, the three things that make food taste good is fat, salt and sugar. Now, all you've got to do is have the self-discipline of knowing how much you have in...
Wilfred, you're not preaching.
I'm telling you what...
You're not saying
this is a
that we should have personal responsibility.
Oh, man, I'm telling you, we're getting into a society where it's always someone else's fault.
I agree.
Rather than actually people saying or knowing it's down to them. And our food industry are really starting to dictate to people what they can and cannot consume. And so one of the reasons I launched my brand, for example, is that a lot of the products, when they're out there and they're quite bland, they're bland because the things that make it taste good have been taken out. And so it gave people like me an opportunity to do something about giving it a great taste. Now, if you ate my sausage all day long, you're going to have a serious problem, not only with obesity, it's not going to be good for you. So I'm not advocating that. What I'm advocating to people is that they take some responsibility. And there's certain things the supermarkets have now started to do because it's been dictated to them by government. Do you remember when you used to be able to go into the supermarkets and you'd be able to have your sweets right at the till and all that? That's now gone. It's had to be put right at the back of the store because they don't think we can be responsible enough.
Temptation must be removed.
We can't allow people to make their own choices. We have to put it into the back of the store. So that's what they've started to do, is the things that we like when we want to give ourselves a treat, we've now got to go wandering for it. And I just don't think that is sort of acceptable. And it's these groups that are going out, doing this research and saying, this is the reason why people are having these health conditions. So therefore, government, you do something about it.
You were, if we go back a few years, you were a Conservative Party activist, you were a parliamentary candidate, you are a libertarian, you believe, and you've expounded it very fully and very passionately, that actually we take responsibility for our lives. We don't want to live in a nanny state. It doesn't work anyway. How is it this party that you were so much a part of has gone down this route?
It's as though you are talking to a socialist government. The type of things that have now been taken as part of the mainstream is really shocking. And then gone are the days when we had, one of my great favourites was Thatcherism, that actually agreed and recognised that people are much better if they're given some responsibility to look after themselves. And it seems that the woke brigade are the ones who are now trying to dictate to us what we should and shouldn't do with our lives. And I just think it comes a time when somebody has to stand up and say, it is enough. And it's as though, actually, that's what the country is crying out for. Someone who's brave enough to say, we don't want to take this nonsense anymore. We want to be able to be given the freedom to do things ourselves.
Our problems are not all because somebody else has done it
Exactly
to us.
right.
We've done it to ourselves.
Exactly right.
It's very interesting, Wilfred, having you back on the programme.
I'm sorry, Nigel, but I could be yakking for ages.
No, because actually what you've just preached, what you've spoken about, would now be seen by many other broadcasters to be uncaring, that you have literally abdicated the role of government in making our lives better. You're saying we've got to stand up as grown-ups on our own 2 feet, look after ourselves and make our own decisions.
And could I just say one thing that really irritates me? There's a lot of people who make a lot of money by telling the rest of us what we should do with our lives. It's those people we should be getting rid of. It's amazing. There's a massive industry out there of these so-called people telling us, those of us down there, actually do what we say rather than do what you want.
Maybe there's a role here for the church and the schools to teach these concepts of personal responsibility too?
Well, I just think in all families, we have to recognise that you come into this world on your own. What we do as parents is that we give our children the skills they need to be able to go out there in this world and make something of their own, rather than think it's going to be handed down to them. We've got into a culture where people somehow feel they're owed it. It's handed down to them.
I agree.
It's not acceptable.
Great to see you.
It's nice to be on a gun.
I think we may have to do a regular feature. Common sense. Wilfred's common sense. And that's what it is. And actually, what Wilfred said, if anybody had said this a few decades ago, would have been considered, well, of course, obviously. And yet now, as the state gets bigger and bigger and bigger, we all think that actually we're not responsible for anything and the state will bail us out. And you know what? It doesn't work. In a moment, we return to the magnificent Turnberry on the day the Royal and Ancient St Andrews Golf Club have decided that the British Open will not go to the #1 golf course in Britain and Europe. Why? Because a certain American friend of mine called Donald owns it. All of that in just a moment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
A few weeks ago, we were at Turnberry, up on the west coast of Scotland in Ayrshire. We were there with Donald Trump, who owns the course and is immensely proud of it. Here he was talking about the course and its prospects of hosting the British Open Golf Championship.
They want to be back here very badly. They think I'm a controversial figure, but they want to be, it's in the Rota. Yeah. And everybody says it's the best course in the world, but, sometimes controversy is good. But yeah, I think so. I think they think I'm a little bit of a controversial figure, even as president. But they're hurting golf because everybody wants to be a Turnberry. Everybody. The pros want to be here, and the people want it to be here. This place would be packed. And actually, I'm not controversial. I just get things done.
Well, that was Donald Trump on Turnberry, and he is, I have to say, inordinately proud of it. He's changed 13 of the 18 holes. When I was there with him at that time, the 6th and 7th he thought could be even better. But despite being on the rota for the Open Golf Championship, the Royal and Ancient St Andrews have announced today they will not be returning him short term to Turnberry because they're worried about possible distractions. Well, joining me now down the line is Ralph Porciani, the General Manager of Trump Turnberry. So, Ralph, they're not going to come to you. The British Open's not going to come. Clearly, the hotel's not good enough, and the golf course isn't good enough.
Good evening, Nigel. Well, actually, I think the real thing we need to talk about is probably three things: the history, the golfers with the course, and also the family. They're the important things here. I mean, the history at Turnberry, Nigel, goes back to 1892. When 5 guys from Girvan decided to create the course. And then the Ailsa was born in 1902. It then survived, as you know, because we saw the history when you were there, 2 world wars, was rebuilt again and went on to host 4 Open Championships. And the most magnificent Open Championship of all, the 1977 Jewel in the Sun, you know, so there's no question whether the Open should return to Turnberry. I think it's a fact, Nigel.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, this word that the RNA used, they're worried about distractions. They're worried about Donald Trump being a bigger figure than the golf if the event came to Turnberry. Do you think that's a fair decision from them?
No, personally, I don't believe so, because I think what's important here is the golfers. You know, I mean, I think, you know, too often now people don't put the daytime, the work job stuff to one side. What we need to focus on is golf. The Ailsa course is a magnificent course. It's #1, as you said, UK, Ireland and Europe just now. You know, the question I get asked every single day by hundreds of golfers that come through Turnberry is when? And I can't answer that. The question I hate to get asked all the time is they ask me why not, you know, because I can't think of a valid reason not to bring it to you know, back to the Ailsa course. Next, I mean, the family, the investment and the commitment that the Trump family have at Turnberry is second to none. You know, 19 years I've been at Turnberry, 3 owners, from, you know, great hotel companies through to Sheikh Maktoum when we were owned by Dubai World. And nobody's shown the commitment to Turnberry, to Scotland and to the UK with the investment, over $200 million committed to Turnberry. But the most important thing, you know, there is that every single penny we take goes back into the course, goes back into the hotel and goes back into the local community. So their commitment to Scotland and golf is second to none.
You know what, Ralph? With or without the British Open, I know that Turnberry's going to go on being a massive success. The Trumps are enormously proud of it. And I stayed there, and you're doing a great job, and it's a fantastic place. So don't let the RNA worry you. Carry on doing what you're doing, and thank you for joining me tonight here on GB News. Thank you. The What the Farage moment, I bet you haven't heard this, but I've warned you before that in the pursuit of net zero, governments will take away your freedoms, your choices and your liberties, and they will diminish your quality of life. In France, they are banning domestic flights. Now, I'm not joking. They're banning domestic flights on charter flights from major airports. They're also banning private jet charter flights unless there's a very specific business reason. Now, there's a way around this, of course. The way around it is if you can get by train within 2.5 hours to the destination, all the flights will be banned. Trouble is, in France, you go and try and get a train from Paris, you'll find they're nearly always full. Probably they'll force more people actually back onto the roads. This ban on short-haul flights, don't think this is confined to France. It's coming here soon. In the pursuit of net zero, they will take away many of our choices and many of our freedoms, and all the while, the rest of the world will burn 8 billion tonnes of coal in 2023. Well, talking of ridiculous ironies, it is quite extraordinary how a government that says it wants to stop the boats and control our borders actually for years and still goes on funding organisations who are completely opposed to virtually any form of border control. It makes you wonder who the real Conservative Party are. Well, of course, Charlie Peters is the GB News Investigates reporter. Charlie, tell us about this ludicrous state of affairs.
We have a new update to this story now. So the Telegraph broke yesterday that the government was funding to the tune of £1.36 million the Paul Hamlin Foundation, a left-wing pressure group that was pushing out views that the government's migration system was systematically racist. It also had links, and it had funded one of the members of the Migration Advisory Committee, a lady called Madeleine Sumption. It's a 5-person team. But GB News can disclose today that another member of the committee, Professor Joe Swaffield from the University of Southampton, is also being funded by a left-wing pressure group. That is the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. It's received £2 million in government grants since 2020. She sits at the foundation as a trustee, and it has made a rather set of controversial claims. It is claimed that the migration policies in this country are institutionally racist. It has slammed hostile migration policies. And it's also, its CEO has said that we've all grown up in institutions that foster racism. And also, it also funds Detention Action, a pressure group linked to very liberal approaches to migration, which has also slammed our border policies as racist.
So the government uses our money, taxpayer money, to fund organisations who say basically there should be no border controls whatsoever, whilst government policy is to stop the boats and reduce immigration.
Indeed, and the remarkable thing is that this professor has registered her interests with the government. It's publicly available information. So the government must be aware that it is receiving migration advice from a very small elite group that is a new Labour-founded quango full of people who are linked to left-wing pressure groups. So they can say one thing on their migration policy, but the advice they choose to receive and the people they choose to support say completely the opposite.
I wonder whether the ministers ever get told this stuff.
Yes, well, it's all online if they want to look. I think perhaps some might say that there's a dereliction of duty from the number of migration ministers we've had who must be receiving all this information and ask, who is actually informing me and why aren't people taking a look at where this information is coming from? I mean, obviously the word racist is bandied about all the time for all sorts of reasons. But if your own policies, your own sensible policies to reduce tens of thousands of people coming over illegally are described as racist, surely you'd want to check where that information is coming from and who is pushing that line and whether or not the taxpayer is paying for them.
So what do we do now as a channel? You've been digging deep on this, others, and Full Marks and Telegraph as well, for digging up what they have. What do we do now? Do we write to Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, and Rishi Sunak and demand that the real Conservative Party stands up? Which are they? Do they support these groups? Or do they support stopping the boats? What do we do next?
Well, it's a question more for the politicians, but the best that GB News can do is reaffirm the pressure to show that these people are not necessarily advising in their best interests. Joe Swaffield, this professor, very openly lists this register. It's not hidden or secret information. It's just rarely disclosed because I don't think there's a particular level of focus or investigation in this space. And it also comes in the context, of course, last year, Conservative Way Forward, a pressure group, finding that hundreds of millions of pounds was being spent by taxpayers on equality, diversity and inclusion measures, which the government regularly rails against. So you have ministers saying one thing, but taxpayers' cash going in the opposite direction.
Absolute joke. Charlie Peters, you're doing a great job here at GB News. We're going to write, this programme is going to write to Suella Braverman to ask her, does she support these organisations that are funded by taxpayers' money, or does she support government policy? In a moment, we will discuss the upcoming Epsom Derby. Sponsored by Betfred this year, it takes place on Epsom Downs this Saturday afternoon. Animal Rising, the group who caused mayhem at the Grand National, and in my view, the death and injury of horses unnecessarily, are promising further action. We will have an open debate between Animal Rising and a representative of the racing industry. All of that in 2 minutes.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, going back to early April, it was the Grand National. I was going to the National. I hadn't been for blooming years. I had a fabulous day, but I have to say it was all a bit disconcerting because the start was delayed by at least 15 minutes. And then when the horses got to the start line, there was a full start. They had to start again. This was all because of protests by Animal Rising. And what we saw in the first two fences, we saw as many animals fall or dismount as we had in the previous 9 years on those two fences. And having actually seen some of those horses sweating up in the paddock before with all the delays, I'm not surprised. I was bloomin' angry. I felt Animal Rising had actually achieved the opposite result of their stated intentions. The following few days, Charlie Brooks, racing man, writes for The Telegraph, wrote a piece which said, "We live in a democracy, and everyone should have the right to express their opinion, assuming it is within the bounds of our democratic laws." And that rider is, I think, very, very important. And we're having these debates, of course, about Just Stop Oil and what is legal and what is not. But what Charlie Brooks urged in the article is there's no point in the racing industry and its supporters like me just saying these people are lunatics, they're absolutely out of touch with the real world. What Charlie argued is you have to have open, genuine debate. And that is exactly what we are about to do for the next few minutes. I'm joined by Richard Pittman, former British jockey and commentator on racing for 37 years, so racing very much in Richard's blood, and Nathan McGovern, who is a spokesperson for Animal Rising, and I will attempt, I mean, you all know my point of view, but we want to have a civilised conversation for the next 6 or 7 minutes. Nathan, your mob, and I'm going to call them that, you want to screw up the Epsom Derby this Saturday. Apparently 1,000 of you are going to storm the track. So it isn't just jump racing you're against flat racing too.
Yeah, so what's at the heart of this, Nigel, is the fact that we have a broken relationship with other animals and the natural world. You know, we see it in our food system, we see it when we use horses for racing. You know, we see, 20 horses have died on tracks in the UK this month alone. And I think we really need to have a look at ourselves and think, we're a nation of animal lovers. We need to make our actions align with that value.
Are you suggesting that Richard Pittman is not a lover of horses?
No, absolutely not. And as I've just said, and we've had some fantastic discussions in the green room
I bet.
before. I think Richard does love horses, but, from where I'm standing, we need to find a way of loving these animals without hurting them.
Well, Richard, I presume you would argue that, I mean, we've seen some photographs we're going to put on the screen of your horses this afternoon. You love your horses, don't you?
Yes, and also all trainers and jockeys do too. There's danger in everything, but what I'd like to say to Nathan is, I sympathise because you are a really good man and you've thought your path out, but you're using us, the Grand National Derby, because we're a big stage, and it is a far bigger thing that you're against rather than horse racing.
OK. The point that Richard's making is you're using these big spectaculars, and of course they're global events. Mm-hmm. But actually, the truth is, Nathan McGovern, you want to stop us riding horses completely. You want to stop us even owning horses as domestic animals.
Yeah, so what I'd say is, that's out in the open, that I'd love us to have the conversation we're having here about, our connection to these animals and the fact that if we do love them, as I absolutely believe Richard does, then we need to find, ways where they don't die on tracks.
Okay, I understand you don't want jump racing. I didn't know you also wanted to stop flat racing, but there we are. But I'm getting the feeling you don't think we should even own horses and ride them for pleasure at home.
No, absolutely not. What I'd say is, it extends far beyond on horses. It's, when we take, animals as, ours to use and even exploit, I think we have to look and really think, are these the people that we want to be?
We breed these animals. They wouldn't exist if we didn't breed them. They wouldn't even exist.
That's a very good point, Nigel, but it's not a numbers question. It's a moral question. Is it right to breed animals into existence purely for our use?
In Nathan McGovern's world, what would the relationship between man and horse be?
Well, so, at the moment, there's about 12% of the UK is forest, and we'd like to see a much higher amount of that so we can have a real solution to our biodiversity crisis. We can see, wild horses that we only see, on the Scottish Islands, we only see on Dartmoor. We'd love to see a world where, I can, walk, 15 minutes out into the countryside and I can see dozens of different animals.
Hang on. Let me just pin you down. Are you saying that all horses in our country should be wild horses?
Yeah, I'm saying that all horses in this country should not exist purely for our use for them.
Well, Richard, you've heard the case.
Yeah.
He hasn't quite answered my question. But do you get the feeling that you're being told you shouldn't own horses, you shouldn't breed horses? I mean...
Yeah, but it's far deeper than that, isn't it, Nathan? I don't think that Animal Rising wants any pets anywhere. And I think you're more likely to upset the millions of dog owners and cat owners and goldfish owners by your action. You're a thoroughly committed man, but I don't see how it would happen. Thoroughbreds, they're like Usain Bolt and people like that. You put them in a forest, they would not survive. The breed would die out.
How do you... I mean, Richard, when you look at Nathan, and you said he's sincere, and we don't doubt that he is sincere, and he wants to have a debate, and thank goodness for that. We saw ludicrous scenes at Oxford University last night of people attempting to shut down debate. And we want to have debate. But you look at Animal Rising, what it stands for. How would you describe them?
Well, I'm fairly new to it and coming through the Grand National. And I think we all have a right to express our opinions. Yep. But when it comes to stopping a big thing like the Derby, and I don't know how you're going to do it, Nathan. It's about 800 acres, but I'm sure you're not going to tell me how you're going to do it. But don't go in through the travellers' camp, because you may not get out the other end. But, you know, these horses, Nigel, as you would know, thoroughbreds originated from Arab horses and have gone through the mill over the years. We have these beautiful animals. If you competed an Arab horse against a thoroughbred, the thoroughbred would win by 50 lengths. You know, it's a breed that has been fine-tuned, and it is a very particular breed.
Yeah. I mean, is Richard Pittman right? Do you ultimately want to stop us not just having domesticated horses, but having cats and dogs?
Yeah, but the reason for that...
Hang on. Let me just clarify that answer. So you don't think we should even have pet cats and dogs?
No, not for our use, you know. But what I think is, if you'll let me explain, Nigel...
It's a very extreme position.
...is that we're a nation of people that love animals. It's why a lot of us have cats and dogs in our homes.
Yeah.
But we also live in a country that has a barren landscape, devoid of biodiversity, devoid of animals that, you know, I would love to see return. I'm sure a lot of people would love to see return. There's cross-party support for things like rewilding, where we would see animals in abundance in nature, and we know we wouldn't have to go to a racetrack to see horses run. We wouldn't have to go to a zoo to see deer.
You know, I am very much an old-school environmentalist. You know, I'd love to... And one of the reasons I support shooting and fishing and hunting is that actually it's through those activities that we see great husbandry of the countryside. But you are saying that these protests we're going to see on Saturday ultimately are about totally changing man's relationship with animals, so we don't even have pet dogs and cats.
It's not about that. It's about asking people to think about it, Nigel, and to people think about if their actions align with their values. I don't have the power to change what people think, and neither do I want to.
No, but
I would love to have people...
In the Nathan McGovern world, there'd be no pets.
No, but what there would be is would be animals for us to see in nature.
Right,
there
Richard,
are animals
Richard, that's the position.
To enjoy seeing.
I just want to put to you, Nathan, a couple of your colleagues, peers, got onto the course at Aintree and were trying to glue themselves to the fence. The jockey's reaction to that was they wanted to get on. Well, leave them be there. We'll jump over them, you see. So it would have been fun, but it couldn't happen. But the thing about the Derby, go back to the suffragettes when they were... Emily Pankhurst...
1911.
On Tattenham Corner, jumped out. And
she was killed.
They go so much faster, the flat horses, especially coming down Tattenham Corner. They're heavy, 700 kilos, steel-shod hooves, going very fast, packed together. I just hope that whatever you're going to do is not during the race.
It could end badly for people and for horses. Thank you, both of you. You see, there's our attempt to have a civilised debate. Actually, do you know what? To some extent, I do think we succeeded. And it's rather important that we do succeed with these things. I think that the position that Animal Rising take and Just Stop Oil take, when you actually logically get it towards the end, is a position that is in such a minority in the country that the more we talk about it, I think the less support they'll have, even though I don't doubt Nathan's sincerity, and I know that Richard Pittman genuinely loves his horses. Jacob Rees-Mogg joins me. Jacob, what's coming up today?
Well, we're going to be talking about the free trade deals that we've now got in Australia,
New Zealand,
and why we should get rid of tariffs now, because we've got a cost of living crisis. An easy way to bring down prices is to stop putting them up by taxation.
They're all saying that Brexit's made food more expensive, but of course we can import food from all around the world far more cheaply.
Far more cheaply, and we should do it urgently. And that actually when prices are high, that's the time to do it, because it's least painful for farmers who are getting higher prices at the moment, and it's best for consumers. We're also going to be talking about the National Trust, which I don't think you can trust anymore because people have given it things and it's going to get rid of them.
No. Well, we've just talked about farmers. Let's see what the weather forecast is for our farmers and others.
Hello there, welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast on the Met Office. I'm Craig Snow. Well, as we head into summer, for most of us it should be dry and settled. Best of the sunshine out towards the west And it's all down to this area of high pressure keeping things firmly settled across the UK. Weak weather fronts across the far north will just give the odd spot of rain here and there, but for most, as I mentioned, dry and settled, and that's how we will end Wednesday. Lots of clear skies out towards the west. However, in the east, we will see cloud, and that will just gradually spread its way a little bit further westwards as the night goes on. So under the cloud, temperatures not falling much lower than 8 to 10 degrees, but in the clearer skies, especially across Northern Ireland and Scotland, could just turn a bit chilly for the first day of summer here. But the good news here is that there'll be plenty of sunshine from the word go. And as we go through the course of Thursday, that cloud will be nibbled backwards towards the east coast. So an increase in amounts of sunshine for most of us. So a fairly pleasant afternoon for a lot of the UK. But fortunately for eastern coast of England especially, the cloud may well be stubborn and linger all day. And combined with an onshore breeze, feeling fairly cool for early June, but out towards the west, another pleasantly warm day with highs reaching 23 or 24 degrees. A fine end to the day in the west as we go into the small hours of Friday, but the cloud across the east will return westwards as the night goes on. So really a repeat performance of previous nights. So under the cloud, temperatures not falling much lower than 8 to 10 degrees. Could even see a touch of frost, however, in Scotland under the clear skies as we start Friday morning. But for many, Friday will be a very similar day to Thursday. Once any